What if Russia doesn't invade NATO with tanks? What if instead it sends something much harder to deal with? Armed men with no insignia, saboteurs, cyberattacks, drones, unmarked military personnel operating inside NATO territory. The goal wouldn't necessarily be conquest, it could simply be to test NATO, to see how far Russia can push before Europe decides an attack has actually happened. Europe is increasingly preparing for exactly that scenario. Before we get into it, if you're finding value in these breakdowns, hitting like and subscribing to Reach Defense Media genuinely helps us keep putting this kind of coverage out. We'd really appreciate it. Russia has already demonstrated how powerful this approach can be. The Wagner Group gave Moscow something extremely valuable: plausible deniability. Deploy fighters, conduct combat operations, pursue strategic objectives, while maintaining distance from the Russian military itself. After Prigozhin's failed mutiny and death in 2023, Wagner was largely absorbed into organizations under greater state control, but the broader model remains: deniable personnel, proxies, intelligence operatives, and unconventional forces creating problems below the threshold of conventional war. The reason it's so dangerous is ambiguity. Imagine an armed group appears inside a Baltic country, heavily equipped, operating professionally, wearing no Russian uniforms. Russia denies involvement. The attackers claim to be local volunteers. Is this an invasion, a terrorist attack, or a Russian operation? While governments argue, the attackers keep moving. That ambiguity is the weapon. NATO knows this. Article 5 isn't limited to tank invasions. Significant cyber attacks and hybrid attacks could potentially trigger collective defense. But there's a critical caveat. It's assessed case by case. Scale, attribution, and consequences all matter. Russia couldn't launch any cyber attack and automatically trigger a NATO response. That gap is exactly what makes the gray zone so useful. Europe isn't just theorizing. In March 2026, the EU Council specifically condemned Russia and its proxies for persistent hybrid campaigns, including sabotage, cyber attacks, information manipulation, election interference, and infrastructure attacks. Sanctions followed. NATO physically increased presence around vulnerable infrastructure in response. The Baltic Sea became a particular focus. Underwater cables and pipelines are now major strategic concerns. NATO launched Baltic Sentry in 2025, frigates, maritime patrol aircraft, and naval drones monitoring critical undersea infrastructure. In 2026, NATO expanded cooperation between 8 northern European members to rapidly acquire maritime surveillance technology and test dozens of drones. A cable gets cut, a pipeline gets damaged, a communications network gets disrupted. Suddenly a country has a security crisis with no clear attacker to respond to. Russian drone violations of Polish airspace in September 2025 triggered Eastern Sentry, increased fighter aircraft, air defense systems, and rapid reaction capabilities along NATO's entire eastern flank. Poland sits at the center of all this, bordering Belarus and Ukraine and responding with one of the most aggressive military buildups in Europe. The point isn't just preparing for conventional invasion. If proxies start attacking infrastructure or seize strategic locations, the military may be needed before anyone has formally declared anything a war. Europe's broader response weaves together intelligence agencies, cybersecurity organizations, counter-drone systems, critical infrastructure protection, special operations forces, and rapid reaction capabilities into a unified security architecture. The goal isn't simply destroying an invading army, it's detecting unconventional attacks before they become full-blown crises. The hardest question remains unanswered. What happens if Russia deliberately crosses the line? A Russian-backed group seizes a strategic building inside NATO. Russia denies involvement, NATO intelligence says otherwise. Does the alliance invoke Article 5? Does the affected country respond alone? Does Europe try to contain the situation without escalating into direct NATO-Russia war? The entire point of gray zone warfare is to engineer exactly that uncertainty. Europe is preparing not because a Russian invasion is inevitable, but because Russia doesn't need to fight NATO conventionally to cause enormous damage. It can attack the space between peace and war. The question isn't whether Europe can defeat Russia militarily, it's whether Europe can recognize an unconventional attack fast enough and respond together before ambiguity becomes paralysis. You don't have to cross the border with an army for Europe to consider you at war. Ensure you subscribe to Reach Defense Media for more content like this.